This is a little method that you can use to, on the one hand, stop dieback along the trunk, and on the other hand, help heal the wound more quickly than you would normally. It is early spring and I just removed a fairly big sacrifice from the bottom of a bonsai trunk. But look at those leaves, as big as a hand. Insane. This is the result of cutting back a big sacrifice. This of course leads to a big discussion on the risk of dieback, and certainly when you remove a big branch like this from the bottom of the trunk, there is a big risk of dieback. Have you ever wondered how you can avoid it? I'll show you in this video how I prepared the bonsai for removing this sacrifice. Tip: it is about multi-phase cutting. Hey, welcome, this is Jelle with Growing Bonsai, and it is spring. The trees have started to grow and it is a perfect time to start looking at a few sacrifice branches that I need to remove. How do you remove a sacrifice branch without the trunk dying back? This is a linden tree and I have used a low branch to create a thicker trunk down low. Now the sacrifice branch has done its work and it's time to remove it. Because it is so low on the trunk, if I just cut it off, there is a risk that the trunk dies back all the way to the ground. Now how do you solve that? First, with the saw, you make a cut as close to the trunk where you want it to be removed as possible, and another one a centimeter or two away from the trunk. Having made these two cuts, we can now try to either break or use cutters or chisel to remove the part in between. Add cut paste on the cut side on the trunk and let the tree just grow naturally for the rest of the season. Now what will happen is that as the tree produces sugars and passes those on to the root system and water comes up from the roots through the trunk, a lot of traffic is happening in this area, but also from the sacrifice branch. As such, a lot of callus will be formed here in the intersection. This will aid in recovery, and because the bark is still intact here below, it reduces the risk of dieback. In fact, there is no risk of dieback after this. I have two trees here. One of them is this trident tree. This branch was cut off last spring. Over the year I kept all the growth in check. I didn't want it to grow out, I actually wanted the stump to die off. What has happened since then is that all the sap flow has been directed around this stump and now I can remove the stump. With the saw I've removed big lumps, and now with my, actually it's not concave, it's knob cutters, I can remove sections here. What you can see here, the green, this means that that part of the trunk is still alive. All the brown that I'm removing has died back, so there's no sap flow going into the branch, which means that the risk of dieback is minimal. Make sure that all around you have good green, because that is where the new growth will come from and the bark will cover it. Cut paste stops the cambium from drying out at the edge, and therefore you get a faster healing. Quick early summer update. It's growing fantastic, but look at those leaves, as big as a hand. Insane. This is the result of cutting back a big sacrifice. You do get very coarse, heavy growth in the season of cutting it off. But it will solve itself next year. Middle of summer and these have grown exceptionally well. Look at that. Can sit underneath them, and even this sacrifice branch, which I said I was going to not let get that strong, has grown quite well. So let's tackle that first. As said, I want to reduce sap flow over the sacrifice, so it's not such a big deal later this year when I remove the rest of the stump. Here, this one is also on the sacrifice. Right. And the same here. lot smaller already, right? Now look at this cut wound here. Most of the cut paste has disappeared, but it is starting to close over quite well. And what I can do now is, with a knife, just scar the edge of the wound again and add new cut paste, so that until the end of the season most of this wound will have closed. Just like that. This triggers the wound in creating new callus, expanding therefore the wound tissue over the damaged area, aiding in closing it up. Now this cut here on the trunk has almost completely closed because of this sacrifice branch. With that has done its work. I can now just remove it as flush as possible to the main trunk. Right, we're at the end of the growing season, and well, it's hard to tell. I'll try to pull the camera in, but you can see that callusing now has happened on both the sacrifice branch as well as the trunk. And now I can take a chisel and remove more of the bark and the trunk here on the side. And slowly, over the next couple of months, I'll remove the whole main branch. And in spring I can separate the whole thing. And that way I have now created a safe way to remove a large branch without it causing lots of dieback. So I'm just taking off the bark, reducing the sap flow from the sacrifice. Right, a year has flown by and now I'm actually a little bit early. Normally I would wait until mid-spring to separate the rest, but you can't really tell what's happening until I remove this last little stump. So let me just cut this off and zoom in with the camera. So by cutting here the first half, basically this half of the branch, this has started to bark over on the sacrifice, but also here on the trunk. That means that the sap flow from the main trunk has already diverted around this area. So now by cutting this, and because I removed a lot of foliage from the sacrifice, there's not a heavy demand here on the bark. Now I'm going to leave this like this for a couple of months, maybe the rest of the year, and then later on I will carve this down nice and smooth and have no chances of this dying back any further. Now here on the Trident you also can see this wound halfway covered, maybe halfway covered. Another year or two and this will completely close over. I dropped the cut paste somewhere, so I'll have to get some new cut paste and put some new paste on here and maybe even scar the bark again. But this will close over as the top grows. You see here, this is an old location, this is completely closed. There's a little bit of a dimple, which is one of the reasons why I like to keep all the cuts as much as possible on the back of the tree and just grow the trunk out on the front.